It began with a moment so surreal that even the dusty horizon seemed to hold its breath. In a flash, a mere 30 seconds that could have been lifted from a movie trailer, a 60-ton tank rumbled onto my ranch road. Its massive treads crushed an old, beleaguered SUV into a twisted heap. The deafening metallic roar, the violent shaking of the earth, and the wild disbelief on the faces of onlookers fused into a scene that would forever define that day. I stood at the doorway of my weathered ranch house, the cool evening air turning electric with tension as I watched this surreal act of retribution unfold. The tranquility of my land had always been my sanctuary, a patch of Texas earth where time moved slower and the simple rhythms of nature reigned. I'd inherited this ranch from my father, a stern yet kind man who taught me the value of hard work and fairness. It was a legacy steeped in both pride and responsibility. That night, as the sky shifted from a brilliant sunset to the deep blues of twilight, I found myself at the epicenter of a storm I never saw coming. It was a collision between entitlement and the unyielding spirit of the frontier. Brenda had arrived on my property in a beat-up white SUV, a vehicle as incongruous with the rugged landscape as her haughty demeanor was with her so-called sense of ownership. She had parked her car right in the middle of the only access road, effectively barricading the path and challenging the very notion of my property rights. Her eyes sparkled with a mix of arrogance and determination as she stepped out, adorned with expensive accessories that seemed to scream, "I'm important." The absurdity of it all was not lost on me, yet I felt a deep-seated responsibility to protect what was rightfully mine. I approached her with measured calm, hoping to explain the boundaries that had been set long before she decided to stake her claim. But as soon as I uttered a word about private property, she scoffed and retorted with a shrill voice that echoed across the silent expanse of the road. It was as if every ounce of her being was dedicated to defying the simple truth of my ownership. With a disdainful gesture and a haughty laugh, she made it abundantly clear that she viewed the situation as nothing more than a minor inconvenience, a mere hiccup in her otherwise perfect day. Her attitude, however, was not just a personal affront. It had all the makings of a spectacle. Before I could fully assert my rights, she whipped out her phone and began recording, her fingers tapping rapidly as if broadcasting a live news segment. Within minutes, her video was spreading like wildfire on social media. I could almost hear the chorus of hashtags and exclamations from her growing legion of online supporters. Hashtags like Free Road Queen, Tyranny in Texas, and countless others painted her as a martyr standing up against an oppressive system. I realized then that this was no ordinary encounter. It was a high-stakes moment, a confrontation that would soon spiral far beyond the confines of my humble ranch. The irony was not lost on me. Here was a woman who believed that the laws of society bent in her favor, and here I was, a man trying to reclaim the dignity of his land. In that charged moment, every word and every gesture seemed to carry the weight of history, as if the spirit of the Old West had returned to remind us both of our place in this rugged land. As the minutes passed, I found myself recalling the conversation I had earlier with an old friend, a former Army buddy who was scheduled to bring in a decommissioned Abrams tank for a veteran ceremony the following day. The plan had been nothing more than a nostalgic tribute to our past glories and sacrifices, a chance to celebrate the camaraderie and discipline of military life. Yet fate, with its penchant for dramatic irony, had other plans. The tank and its accompanying convoy of Humvees would soon become the instruments of an unexpected retribution. I couldn't help but smirk at the unfolding absurdity. Here was Brenda, defiantly defending her right to park on what I knew was private land, while a tank, a relic of military might, loomed in the background, waiting to deliver a dose of long overdue karma. I made a quiet decision then and there. If she was determined to make a stand, I would ensure that this encounter was etched in the annals of my ranch's history. Even as the rumble of heavy machinery began to punctuate the twilight, I tried one last time to reason with her. I explained in calm, measured tones that this was private property, that her actions were not only illegal but also dangerous. She listened with a smug smile, her eyes flickering with a mix of defiance and a desire for attention. In response, I handed her a document, a waiver really, which humorously disclaimed responsibility for damages caused by military-grade hardware. Instead of de-escalating the situation, my attempt at levity only fueled her indignation. With a fit of rage, she tore the document to shreds, each piece fluttering away like discarded promises. The stage was set for a showdown of epic proportions. I retreated inside, waiting for the inevitable arrival of my convoy, the sound of its engines drawing ever closer. Every creak of the old floorboards, every whisper of the wind through the mesquite trees seemed to underscore the impending collision of two worlds, one defined by stubborn entitlement and another by the relentless force of accountability. When the first Humvee finally appeared on the horizon, its headlights piercing the gathering darkness, a murmur of anticipation ran through the small crowd that had gathered. Brenda, undeterred and more determined than ever, stepped forward. She squared her shoulders and positioned herself in front of the vehicle as if challenging the very notion of physical power. The absurdity of the scene was heightened by the surreal blend of modern defiance and the raw, timeless might of military machinery. The convoy continued its advance with a sense of inevitability, the vehicles rolling in with the precision of a well-rehearsed performance. Every step of the process was orchestrated to send a message. There are rules in this world, and when you choose to break them, there are consequences. The tension mounted as the massive presence of the Abrams tank became unmistakable, a symbol of overwhelming force that was about to deliver a message louder than any words ever could. And then it happened. In a moment that seemed both impossibly quick and agonizingly slow, the tank began its forward motion, its treads grinding over the asphalt with a relentless determination. Brenda's defiant stance wavered as she realized that the gravity of the situation was far beyond what she had anticipated. The SUV, which had been the focus of her rebellious crusade, was met head-on by the unstoppable force of military hardware. The sound of metal meeting metal, the shudder of the ground, and the flashing lights of cameras capturing every second all combined to create an unforgettable tableau of chaos and justice. In that charged moment, as the tank obliterated the vehicle, I stood there, a silent witness to the consequences of unbridled arrogance. The scene was a blend of tragic inevitability and surreal comedy, a testament to the fact that sometimes, in the most unlikely circumstances, the scales of justice tip in the most dramatic fashion. The echoes of that moment would reverberate far beyond the confines of my property, sparking debates on social media, law enforcement protocols, and the very nature of civil disobedience. The morning sun hadn't even finished breaking over the ridgeline when I stood at the edge of my porch, sipping black coffee and staring down the road like it was some ancient battlefield. I knew what was coming, and this time it wasn't just Brenda's obnoxious SUV parked in defiance. It was a full-blown war of stubbornness, ego, and heavy machinery. Somewhere down that winding gravel path, an armored convoy was rolling toward my ranch, and I'd already resigned myself to the chaos it would bring. As I took another sip, the rumble of diesel engines in the far distance confirmed what I already knew. Today was going to be legendary. Brenda was already out there, of course, like a twisted combination of a medieval gatekeeper and a modern-day influencer. She had camped out beside her mangled SUV, which, despite yesterday's warning, still blocked the only road onto my land. She had upgraded her setup overnight, now equipped with a pop-up canopy, folding lawn chair, and a ridiculous sign that read, "This is a public right-of-way." The kicker? She'd brought reinforcements. They weren't lawyers or cops. No, it was worse. She brought her phone, a portable speaker blaring pop music, and a growing online following cheering her on in real time. Her stream had already gone viral. Comments poured in with fire emojis and battle cries. People called her a hero, others called her delusional. One viewer donated $50 with the caption, "Stand strong, Road Queen." If only they knew what was really about to roll into the frame. I kept my distance, not because I was afraid of her or her makeshift camp of entitlement, but because I'd already said everything I needed to say. She had been warned. I had explained the convoy. I had even given her a copy of the logistics permit, signed by the military for temporary land use. She called it fake. She laughed in my face and dared me to do something about it. Well, something was on its way, and it weighed 60 tons. Around 6:30, the first vehicle crested the hill, a Humvee, matte green and battle-worn, humming with the low, authoritative growl of a V8 engine. Brenda sprang to her feet like a rooster sensing a threat to its territory. Her eyes widened. She pulled out her phone and began narrating the whole thing like she was reporting from a war zone. "They're here. They're actually here. she shrieked into the camera. Can you believe this? These maniacs think they can bully me with tanks. This is America. The Humvee rolled to a stop about 10 feet from her SUV. The driver leaned out the window, gave her a polite nod, and then turned to me. It was Captain Eddie Bull Renner, my old Army logistics buddy, the kind of guy who could disassemble a truck engine blindfolded and still have time to grill perfect steaks before chow time. He wore mirrored sunglasses and a grin like he just walked into a live-action comedy. She's still here? He asked deadpan. Like mold on a sandwich, I replied. He gave a low whistle and keyed the mic clip to his vest. Convoy, hold position. We got ourselves a standoff. Again, Brenda marched toward the Humvee with righteous fury, still filming, narrating, and flailing her arms like a director auditioning for a soap opera. You're trespassing, she shouted. You're threatening me with military weapons on civilian land. This is a violation of my civil liberties. Eddie chuckled and leaned back in his seat. Ma'am, you are currently obstructing a federal logistics route approved for ceremonial military transport. This is your final warning. She laughed. Is that supposed to scare me? I know my rights. This is intimidation. You people are going to be all over the news. You're already on the news, I muttered under my breath, glancing at her live stream where thousands were now watching, commenting things like, this can't be real, and wait, is that a tank? And then, as if summoned by divine comedic timing, the star of the show arrived. The M1 Abrams tank roared onto the scene like a mechanical god of thunder. The ground trembled beneath its treads. Birds scattered from nearby trees. Even the wind seemed to pause for effect. It glistened in the early light, armor panels catching the sun, its massive cannon pointed skyward like the finger of justice. Brenda froze mid-sentence. Her jaw dropped so hard I thought it might detach. For once, the phone in her hand stopped shaking, not because she calmed down, but because her whole body went stiff with disbelief. The tank rolled up behind the Humvee and idled there, engine purring with the patience of a predator waiting for permission to strike. Eddie gave me a look. I gave him a nod. Brenda snapped out of her trance and ran toward the SUV. No, you can't. This is illegal. That's my car. Eddie calmly asked. Would you like to move it now? I'm not moving a thing. I have rights. All right then. He didn't give a speech. There was no dramatic countdown. The Abrams simply lurched forward, slow and deliberate. Brenda screamed and jumped out of the way just in time as the tank met the SUV like a bear meeting a tin can. The metal crumpled instantly, the tires popped like grapes, and glass exploded in a shower of shiny confetti. The sound was both terrifying and weirdly satisfying, like the finale of a fireworks show held in a junkyard. People on her live stream lost their minds. Comments exploded in all caps. Some screamed injustice. Others called it art. One guy said he'd make the footage into a music video. Brenda fell to her knees, sobbing theatrically in front of the wreckage. You'll all pay for this, she wailed. This is war. Eddie shrugged. Ma'am, we brought the tank. I think we won. But the moment of triumph didn't last long. From over the hill, just as the crowd of onlookers and convoy personnel began chuckling and taking photos, the sound of another siren cut through the air. It wasn't the police or the local sheriff. It was military police. And behind them, a black SUV with government plates, the kind of vehicle you only see in political dramas or when something very serious is about to go down. My stomach dropped. The lead MP stepped out, flanked by two more. He walked straight past Brenda, still wailing in front of her squashed car, and headed toward me. Behind him, a stern-faced man in a suit stepped out of the black SUV, holding a folder and scanning the scene like he was processing evidence at a crime scene. You the landowner? The MP asked. I am, I said, standing tall, trying not to show how fast my pulse had just spiked. You might want to come with us. We have some questions about all of this. Brenda heard that and immediately perked up. Yes, arrest him. He's the one who caused all this. He destroyed my car with a military tank. I want him in handcuffs. The man in the suit turned to her slowly. Ma'am, we'll speak with you shortly, but please remain calm. Eddie looked at me, and for the first time all morning, his grin faded. Did you file all the permits? He asked under his breath. Of course I did, I replied. Every one of them. Then why are the suits here? I didn't know, but deep down I had a gut feeling that this wasn't just about a tank rolling over an illegally parked SUV anymore. This had escalated into something much bigger, something that had Washington-level attention. And somehow, I knew this was only the beginning. The air inside that makeshift interrogation trailer smelled like dust, diesel, and a hint of bureaucracy. I sat across from two military police officers, both young, both stiff as iron fence posts, scribbling notes and avoiding eye contact like I was some classified threat to national security. One of them asked me for the third time if I had given a verbal warning to the civilian before the tank rolled over her car. I nodded again and repeated what I'd said. I told her plainly twice. Once in person, once by printed notice. I even emailed her the transport permit. She ignored all of it. The MP looked at the paper in front of him like it might bite. Outside, the convoy had been halted. Soldiers milled around in awkward silence, unsure whether to be proud or paranoid. A crowd of spectators had gathered along the fence, many of them locals who knew me and were already treating this whole mess like a 4th of July parade. But the mood had shifted. The fun was gone. Now it felt like we'd all walked into a courtroom without knowing the charges. And standing at the center of it all, like a mosquito with a megaphone, was Brenda. She was pacing in front of her flattened SUV, waving her hands dramatically to news cameras that had arrived with unholy speed. Where they came from, I had no clue. Maybe she'd called them herself. Maybe word of a tank squashing a civilian car was just that juicy. Either way, her voice was everywhere. She spun the tale like she'd been attacked by rogue mercenaries and saved the nation by standing her ground. Her words bounced from live streams to news tickers. I was exercising my civil rights, she told a reporter, and this man used a weapon of war against me. I could have died. A younger MP came into the trailer and whispered something to the other two. They nodded, stood, and told me I was free to go, for now, but shouldn't leave the property. That didn't feel ominous at all. As I stepped out into the blinding sun, I saw her again. Brenda, center stage, hair frazzled just enough to look victimized, makeup now smudged like she'd practiced her own mug shot. Then I noticed something new. A sleek black SUV pulled up behind the news vans. Not military this time, civilian, but high level. The door opened, and out stepped a man in a sharp blue suit, sunglasses, and the kind of haircut that says, "I work for people who don't want their names on paper." He walked right past Brenda. She followed behind him, suddenly trying to look cooperative, like they were old friends reuniting at a country club brunch. But he ignored her completely and walked toward me. He didn't introduce himself, just said one sentence in a low voice. "I'm from Washington." This just got bigger than either of us. I blinked. Because of a tank. He shook his head. Because of her cousin. Apparently, Brenda wasn't just another internet clout chaser. She was family to someone in the Department of Transportation, someone who had just pulled a few strings and filed a formal complaint accusing me and the convoy of weaponizing military equipment against a civilian. The complaint had reached some ears that didn't like surprises. What was originally a funny story about a tank and a trespasser was now being spun as a potential act of aggression on domestic soil. For a minute, I felt like the ground beneath me had shifted. I wasn't just a rancher anymore. I was a name in a folder somewhere in D.C., connected to an incident that involved military property, federal roads, and a woman with a very big mouth. The Washington guy said they needed to run an internal review to make sure protocol was followed. Meanwhile, the convoy would remain grounded. My event, the reunion, was postponed indefinitely. Word spread quickly. The soldiers who had shown up to honor fallen friends were suddenly packing up quietly, unsure if they'd done something wrong by just showing up. Eddie came to me, shaking his head. "This is messed up, man. We had everything in place. The permits, the route, the communications. And now they're treating this like it was an invasion." "It's her," I muttered. "It's always her." But something was shifting. While Brenda shouted and grandstand and pretended to be a national martyr, the internet began to shift. One of the convoy support crew, a quiet guy named Louise, had uploaded his GoPro footage. It showed the whole event from a dash-mounted camera, showing me giving warnings, her laughing, the posted signs, and even the exact moment the tank began its slow approach. Within hours, it spread like wildfire. People started questioning the narrative. Commentators jumped in. Legal experts on YouTube broke down the obscure federal codes about military transport corridors, and the tide began to turn. Then came the real twist. An anonymous source, no one ever said who, leaked security footage from my ranch's trail cameras. One clip showed Brenda earlier that week, before any of this had happened, snipping a piece of my fence to drive her SUV through a restricted area clearly marked with red signs and government emblems. Another video caught her setting up her camera angles near the road, rehearsing her speech to the live stream before she ever blocked the path. She wasn't a victim. She was staging a spectacle. The footage made its way into the hands of the very Washington official who had first been sent to observe. He wasn't amused. In fact, he returned the next day with a very different tone. "We're dropping the review," he said. "No pleasantries. You did everything by the book," he added. "And as for her, well, let's just say the DOJ has a new folder with her name on it." Brenda's tune changed instantly. Her streams went private. She stopped giving interviews. And most notably, she stopped yelling. But the real blow came 2 days later when a federal agent in a clean-cut polo shirt knocked on her RV door and handed her a notice. It wasn't just a citation. It was an indictment listing federal trespassing, obstruction of military operations, destruction of restricted fencing, and attempted interference with defense logistics. For someone who loved the spotlight, she sure didn't like it when it turned blue and red. But it wasn't over. I thought the nightmare had finally ended. The convoy was cleared to return next month. The media frenzy was fading. My road was quiet again. But just as I let myself breathe, a neighbor drove up with wide eyes and handed me a fresh printed article from a national news outlet. The headline announced that Senator Margaret Thorne condemned military aggression against an unarmed family member, Brenda's mother, a sitting senator, and she was about to make this her personal war. That was the moment I realized the tank was just the beginning. What had started as a simple dispute over a gravel road was about to detonate on the floor of the United States Senate, and I was still holding the match. The senator arrived with all the subtlety of a tornado in a crystal shop. 3 black SUVs came barreling down the county road, each one kicking up more dust than the last, until they screeched to a halt just beyond my cattle gate. Men in suits poured out like cockroaches when the lights come on, scanning the area with earpieces and clipboards. Then Senator Margaret Thorne stepped out, her hair stiff enough to deflect bullets, heels stabbing into the gravel like she was trying to crush the earth, one angry stomp at a time. She didn't look at the land, the ranch, or even the mess her daughter had left behind. She looked straight at me, lips pursed like she just smelled the Constitution burning. I'd seen her on TV before, always barking about ethics, small government, and responsibility. Funny, considering the first thing she did was demand federal intervention in a local property dispute. Her people didn't ask to speak to me. They served me a letter which contained a formal notification of a pending investigation into potential misuse of military equipment against civilians. I didn't need to read the rest to understand the angle. They were going to spin this thing into a full-blown scandal. She wasn't here for justice. She was here for revenge, and I was the easiest target with a face. While I stood on my own front porch, hands in my pockets, trying not to laugh at how absurd it had all become, Senator Thorne marched over like she was preparing to debate me on live television. Her voice was smooth, political, and sharp enough to cut bone. "You may think this is over," she said, "but you used government machinery to damage civilian property. There will be consequences." I smiled. "Your daughter broke federal trespassing laws, ignored repeated warnings, and live-streamed herself doing it. That car she's crying over? It was parked illegally in a military transport route. She didn't flinch. She was misinformed. She was defiant," I replied, "and deliberately disruptive." She handed me another document. This one was a request for land reassessment. They wanted to challenge the military easement that allowed my ranch to be used for convoy transport. If they could strip that easement, they could argue the tank had no business being there in the first place. It was a legal trap designed to twist facts into fiction, but I'd seen worse. I wasn't some clueless landowner who just stumbled into this mess. I was a former logistics officer. I'd built transport plans through war zones, coordinated fuel drops in monsoon storms, and outnegotiated foreign contractors who thought they could rob us blind. This senator thought she was stepping on a doormat. She didn't realize she just walked into a fire pit. I called my lawyer. His name was Mason Briggs, ex-Navy JAG, wore cowboy boots with a tailored suit, and drank his coffee like it owed him money. Mason arrived the next morning with a grin and a folder thicker than Brenda's sense of entitlement. We sat on my porch while he flipped through documents, reading aloud pieces of legal code with a voice so calm it almost sounded bored. "They're trying to undo an easement that's been in place since the 1950s, he said. "Good luck with that. It would require a congressional hearing and a full review by the Department of Defense." "They might just try that," I replied. "Senator Thorne has friends. She's got headlines," Mason corrected. "That's not the same thing." We didn't wait to react. We went on offense. Mason filed a countersuit, accusing the senator's team of unlawful interference in military coordination efforts. We submitted every document, permits, communication logs, convoy schedules, and we even brought in a retired general to write a statement supporting the legitimacy of the route and my cooperation. Within 2 days, Mason also subpoenaed Brenda to provide her live stream footage in full, unedited. She tried to refuse. The court didn't give her that choice. And then something unexpected happened. A local news station ran a piece on the entire situation, highlighting the convoy's purpose, honoring fallen veterans from our old unit. They showed clips of the ceremony we never got to hold, footage of family members, flags folded neatly, and tearful mothers who never got to say goodbye. The internet lost its mind again. Memes returned with vengeance. Thanksgiving on the ranch started trending. A country singer wrote a song about it. Someone animated the tank scene using 8-bit graphics. Suddenly, Senator Thorne was no longer fighting an obscure rancher. She was fighting public opinion, and it was turning fast. Her office doubled down. They pushed articles painting me as a violent man with a grudge against authority. They even tried to dig up dirt, old records, financials, anything they could use. All they found were my honorable discharge papers, a series of community awards, and a local newspaper piece about me rescuing calves during a flood. Then came the press conference. Senator Thorne stood at a podium in D.C., flanked by aides and banners about civil rights. She called what happened a dangerous overreach and claimed her daughter had been traumatized. Halfway through, a reporter asked about the trail cam footage showing Brenda breaking into the restricted area days before the incident. The senator paused, smiled thinly, and denied knowledge, but the damage was done. The footage aired on national TV that night. The truth didn't just leak, it erupted. And then the Pentagon weighed in. A press release stated that the convoy was operating under full legal authority and had been obstructed by a civilian in violation of defense route protocols. They supported the use of the vehicle and emphasized that the incident was handled with restraint. The final blow came when a military spokesperson, pressed for comment on the tank rolling over the SUV, simply said, "The vehicle was in the way." Brenda's story collapsed like her car. Her stream stopped. Her fans vanished. Her lawyer withdrew from the case. And her mother? She faced growing pressure from her own party to step away quietly. By week's end, Senator Thorne announced she would not seek re-election, citing family matters and personal focus. Mason brought me the news with a smirk and a six-pack. We sat on the back porch, watching the sun dip low while the sound of cows replaced the chaos. It should have felt like victory, but it felt more like relief, a long, exhaling kind of relief, the kind that comes when a storm finally breaks and leaves the world just quiet enough to think again. "You know," Mason said, opening a bottle, "you might have set a new record for most Brenda damage in a single week." "Yeah," I said, raising mine, "but I didn't do it for the headlines. I did it so the next convoy doesn't have to stop for someone who thinks a gravel road gives them permission to ignore the law." He nodded, took a sip, and looked out over the field. "You think she's done?" "No," I said, "but I think we are." And for the first time in weeks, that felt like enough. It was early morning when the letter arrived, delivered not by mail, but by a man in full uniform who stepped down from a blacked-out Jeep and handed it to me without saying a word. The envelope was heavy, sealed with a gold insignia I hadn't seen since I left service. There was no return address, just my name written in precise capital letters. I opened it on the porch, barefoot and sipping the last of yesterday's coffee, the cattle lowing somewhere beyond the tree line. Inside was a short note printed on thick stock. It contained a request for my presence at a classified facility 2 counties over. No details, no explanation, just a date, a time, and a simple phrase that made my skin prickle in recognition. It read, "In recognition of your service to national integrity." I didn't know what they meant. I didn't know what to expect, but I went. The base was hidden between hills, surrounded by fences, guarded by men who didn't blink when they checked your ID. I was escorted through 4 gates before I saw daylight again, and finally brought into a room with 2 flags, a single desk, and a man with the kind of posture that screamed retired general. He shook my hand, thanked me for coming, and got straight to the point. Brenda, in her chaos, had stumbled across something far larger than she knew. The road she blocked, the path the tank was forced to reroute through, had led military analysts to re-examine some movement records. Those records exposed a weakness in a smuggling corridor that had been operating quietly for months. In trying to turn herself into a martyr, Brenda had accidentally revealed a real threat, a breach that involved high-level contraband moving across a supposed inactive defense route. It had nothing to do with her, not directly, but her interference triggered the investigation that cracked it open. They didn't need me to do anything. They just wanted me to know and to thank me for not backing down. It wasn't because I caught the criminals or stopped a plot, but because I stood my ground, held the line, and didn't let loud voices rewrite the truth. The general handed me a small box. Inside was a civilian medal of recognition. Simple, understated, but heavier than it looked. I left without much more said, but the handshake at the end lingered longer than most. Back at the ranch, things started returning to normal. The cattle needed tending, the fences needed mending, and my dog took it upon himself to chase every bird that dared land near the barn. But something had shifted in the air. People in town treated me differently now. A nod lasted longer. Strangers showed up at the feed store asking if I was the tank guy. I'd laugh, wave them off, and try to change the subject. But there was no denying it. The story had become legend. The convoy returned, this time without drama, and rolled through the ranch in full formation. The tank didn't crush anything this time. It led a line of vehicles right through a stretch of pasture I'd cleared for the ceremony. Families gathered, flags flew. The missing faces from our unit were honored, names read aloud in the still air while the sun sat heavy on our shoulders. It was the kind of day we'd been trying to build for months, and it landed with more weight than we could have imagined. Justice hadn't just rolled in. It had parked, saluted, and stayed for supper. Brenda, of course, made one last attempt to claw her way back into relevance. From a courthouse bench, facing fines and charges that would have made a lesser person vanish, she recorded a video. Her voice was softer now. There were no filters, no hashtags, and no epic background music, just a woman with puffy eyes saying she didn't know it would go that far. She didn't say she was sorry, not really. More like she was sorry people took it the wrong way. She blamed the media, the military, even her own cousin who'd filed the original report that spun everything out of control. Her followers didn't return. Her channels went quiet. And then the courts sentenced her to community service and restitution payments she'd be making for years. The internet moved on. She didn't. Senator Thorne vanished from politics with a press release that read more like a funeral announcement than a resignation. Her name stopped appearing on cable news. Rumors floated that she'd taken a job consulting for a think tank far away from any cameras. Some said she moved to Europe. Others said she was quietly prepping her memoir. I didn't care either way. The storm had passed, and I had a ranch to run. With the attention dying down, I finally got back to doing what I love. I built a new gate at the road's entrance. This one had steel posts and a swinging iron sign overhead that read Convoy Pass. Just below it, another smaller sign read, Tank Crossing No Exceptions. Some folks said it was petty, others said it was hilarious. I thought it was honest. Sometimes the best warnings are the ones written in humor and welded in steel. And then came the drawbridge. A local welder, inspired by the story, offered to help me install a working drawbridge over the creek that cut across the side path Brenda had used to sneak onto the land in the first place. We made it a joke at first, but by the end, it became a fully functional marvel of overengineering. It had levers, it had chains, it had signs that read, Brenda Detour Access Denied. I charged tourists $5 to cross it during the summer, and every time someone asked why it existed, I'd smile and say, it's a reminder that some lines are meant to stay drawn. One night, as the stars blinked awake and the porch creaked under my chair, Mason stopped by with a cooler full of beer and a grin that hadn't faded since the day the senator packed up. We didn't talk about the past much. We just drank in the silence, watched the horizon, and let the frogs do the talking. You know, he said, opening another bottle, you might be the only man alive who beat both a Brenda and a sitting senator in the same week. I chuckled. Nah, I just got lucky. No, he said, shaking his head. You didn't flinch. Most folks would have folded when the headlines hit. You stood there and let a tank do the talking. The moon hung low, casting a silver glow on the land. The barn creaked. Somewhere a cow mooed, and I thought about how close I'd come to losing everything. My land, my name, and my peace. All because someone refused to accept a simple truth. Just because you're loud doesn't mean you're right. The world spins fast, scandals come and go, but that road, that land, and that ridiculous moment when a 60-ton tank rolled over a luxury SUV just to prove a point will stick around in photos, in stories, and in the paint chip sign hanging from my porch that says, "Private property means you." And maybe, just maybe, the next time someone thinks about blocking a road and daring the world to push back, they'll remember what happened here. Because on this ranch, the road doesn't end for a Karen.